It's great to see everybody here today. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, maybe I don't even need the mic. Okay. So I'm Susan Taberge. I'm a co-founder of Climate Action Now and a founding member of Springfield Climate Justice Coalition, and I work with the NAACP as the Environmental and Climate Action Chair. And I'm really so happy to see all of you here. I want to warmly welcome you. And this is on behalf of the three groups and the committee that organized today's event. So I would like to acknowledge Kathleen Anderson. Kathleen, where are you? Kathleen is the president of the Amherst branch of the NAACP. And I'd like to acknowledge Russ Vernon Jones. Where are you, Russ? And Vera Dominique Cage, who is the fourth member of our organizing committee. Vera. I'd also like to thank our three co-sponsoring groups, Western Mass Jobs with Justice, Western Mass Surge, and Mothers Out Front. So, it is my great honor and joy to introduce Jackie Patterson, the director of the National NAACP Environmental and Climate Justice Program. Jackie has an amazing resume and array of experiences. I'm just going to hit a few highlights because of time. She's a co-founder and coordinator of Women of Color United. She's been a leader and tireless advocate for women's rights, people with HIV/AIDS, and for racial, economic, environmental, and climate justice. She's written a number of publications. I just picked out a few so you could get a sense of the depth of her thinking and the way that she connects issues. Climate change is a civil rights issue. Disasters, climate change uproot women of color. Just energy policies, reducing pollution, creating jobs. And the people shall lead, centralizing frontline community leadership in the movement towards a sustainable planet. She currently serves on the International Committee of the U.S. Social Forum and the Steering Committee for Interfaith Moral Action on Climate. She's on the board of directors for the Institute of the Black World, Center for Story-Based Strategy, and the U.S. Climate Action Network. On a personal level, Jackie Patterson is a heroine and a role model to me. She was a guiding presence in the early stages of Climate Action Now and the creation of the Springfield Climate Justice Coalition. So let's warmly welcome Jackie Patterson.
It's really a joy to be with you all today. Looking forward to spending this time discussing with you. And so the topic I was asked to discuss was when movements unite. And in some ways I'll be discussing why movements must unite. And so this is why we have the title of, in terms of upholding a beloved community and really talking about the just transition we need to make. So the first part of my talk will be kind of laying the groundwork for the type of the basis for the need for the transition, and then I'll be talking a little bit about some of the solutions that are underway and the solutions that need to advance and expand. So again, it's really a joy to be with you, and I thank the same folks, Russ, Vera, Sue, and certainly Kathleen, and all of the sponsoring organizations, and again, all of you for being here. So I want to really start with this, with a grounding of a youth voice and youth leadership, because this is so important in order for us to advance this movement, to have youth leadership, and two, a voice of vision, which is a vision that youth are holding for their future and for their present, and also it's a commonly held vision that we all have around how do we define the beloved community. So this is a video from a group that is in Baltimore, which is where the NAACP headquarters is, and it's called Free Your Voice, and it's their campaign campaign to really preserve their basic human rights in terms of the right to live free of, to live with clean air, clean water, and a healthy and safe existence. And so this is part of a campaign that they were doing specifically around to keep out an incinerator that was being proposed for their backyard, which would have been the second largest incinerator in the nation that was being proposed for their backyard. So the voice that you'll hear is that of Destiny Walford, and this will go smoothly for us. Let's see. And she actually was the winner of a Goldman Prize after this campaign. And let's see. All right, it's bigger for us.
My name is Destiny. I was born and raised in Curtis Bay, a tight-knit community in the city of Baltimore. Curtis Bay is my home, and it means a lot to me, which is why I want to show you what it's like to live here. Here's my high school. Last year, a group of students and myself created a human rights group called Free Your Voice. As a group, we transformed the way that we looked at the world in terms of our basic human rights and what we want for ourselves, our families, and our communities. We have a lot of things that we're proud of in our community. This is our garden. Beautiful, isn't it? The garden provides fresh fruits and veggies for the community because we don't have a local grocery store. But to be perfectly honest, I'm not a fan of bugs. And as you can imagine, the garden is filled with them. But it's worth it because the garden brings the community together. A lot of students from Curtis Bay Elementary School and community members helped to build it. We made the garden from the ground up and we're all really proud of it. It's something we can call our own. Now I want to show you our park. Our park can serve as a kind of sanctuary, a safe place where children can have fun and be themselves. It's kind of like living in your own little universe, a place where the ugliness of the world isn't allowed. All communities should have this, but we don't. Come on, there's one last place I want to show you. This is Curtis Bay's backyard. Growing up, I knew the industry was here. I could see it, I could smell it, but I learned to ignore it. For some reason, I never felt welcome. I wonder why. Over time, it was almost as if it wasn't there, but it is. Curtis Bay and communities surrounding it are suffering on a daily basis. The pollution threatens our health and our environment. We know the air we breathe isn't clean. We know this, however, we lack answers to basic questions about how bad it is. What's worse is that we often don't play a meaningful role in the decisions that affect us. And the only ones who seem to be paying any consequences are community members who have to breathe the air. We suffer the most. Despite the pollution in the industry this community already has, there's a plan to build the nation's second largest incinerator, less than a mile away from our school, our garden, and our park. The last I checked, Curtis Bay is a community just like any other. People live here, our children, our families, our friends, and I feel the sanctity of human life is not being acknowledged or respected. All of this makes it feel like community members don't matter and are irrelevant, and that we aren't humans at all. But we are. I'm human, all the people of Curtis Bay are humans, and as humans, we have the right to fair development that respects our rights and puts community needs first. But this will only happen if we begin to learn, reflect, and act together in a way that allows us to solve problems that we're all facing together.
As I said, the reason that Destiny was able to win this the Goldman Prize was because you have to have a victory in order to win the Goldman Prize, and they were successful in this youth-led campaign to block this. Okay, so as you saw, she articulated the vision that she holds, and I think that it's a common vision that we all hold, a vision of making sure that our human rights are upheld, a vision of a community that has beauty, that has clean air, clean water, uncontaminated land, and really a sense of community, a sense of togetherness and cooperation and well-being. And so we'll talk about some of the ways that our current systems and the ways that our systems are set up aren't respecting human life and aren't respecting the bounty of our ecosystem, on which we all are interdependent for our existence. And so we talk about this historical context in terms of the transition of exploitation, of rampant extraction, and of domination type ways that we are operating our country in order to have wealth that's being held by a few, and the rest of us are reaping the challenges from that. And the ways that it's done are through the rulemaking that's being done that covers everything from our manufacturing laws, our finance laws, our labor laws, and so forth. And the results are violation of human rights and, of course, the pollution and the impediments to sustainability for our planet. And so when we see these systems develop, we know that there's certain ways that when we're talking about exploitation, certain groups, populations, nations that are more subject to the exploitive side of the exploitation side of the domination, and it's often being done through economic status, through race, through gender, through immigration status, and so forth. That this domination happens. And so, and as a result, this violation of human and civil rights, as Destiny said, her group is a human rights group, and often in the U.S. we don't even really talk about human rights. At best, we talk about civil rights, and even that has been under question, and certainly more than ever is under question now. And so, I want to remind us of what human rights are, so that we can really start to push for a framework that values all of us as having these commonly held rights. So I just posted them up there. I won't read those to you. And we also know that, as I said before, that there are certain groups that are that we're all affected by this kind of bad paradigm of exploitation, domination, and so forth. But then there's certain groups, as we said, are more than others, but yet we recognize it, even if certain groups are experiencing it more, it assails the human rights of all of us. So I just remind us of Martin Luther King's quote, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." And so I want to frame some of these comments about some of these injustices around through the commons, the things that we should all have access to, the things that we all need for life, whether it's the clean air, clean water, energy in order and food, and also the waste disposal, the ability to have waste disposal in a way that's safe and healthy. And so, but part of the problem that happens is that we have these sacrifice zones across the United States because there are certain communities that are host to the processes in order to develop the things that we all need as a commons. And it's often those same communities that don't have access to the commons. They're the ones who are more subject to shutoffs or more subject to food insecurity and so forth. So we'll kind of go through a series of vignettes that shows that relationship, again, all towards why we need to be working together as a movement, because each of these things are inextricably connected to each other. So I'm using first of all the Flint water crisis as an example. So we know that the Flint water crisis really started with the fact that why was the Flint River so polluted in the first place. So the Flint River was full of all types of pollutants and contaminants and so forth, and it's based on the legacy of the manufacturing that happened there and the unfettered pollution that the manufacturing created that went straight into the Flint River and also went into the air quality in Flint. So whether it's the auto industry, the coal-fired power plant that was there, so the things that would produce things that we need, like movement of goods and people, things that we need like energy, but it was also at the stake and at the detriment of the community members and their health and well-being, as well as of the river there. And so we had that level of contamination that happened, and then one of the reasons that it did happen is again because of the relationship between corporate interest and our policy making. So the fact that it was able to happen without any restriction whatsoever is because we don't have enough policies to protect our rivers and our streams from pollution, and as you know, in the current context, that's even going to be worse. And so, as a result, that's what happened with the river. And then from there, as these very industries that polluted Flint so badly uprooted, then it also took the economic engine for the city of Flint. So Flint was a population of 200,000 people. When all that industry left, more or less in the same time, over a very short time period, it took 80,000 jobs. And so it took the entire way of generating finances for the community. And so that took away the livelihood, the ability of people to be able to earn money and feed their families. And it also took away the finances that run the infrastructure for Flint. And so Flint was really just in deep, deep, deep blight after that exodus. And so that was what left it vulnerable to a state takeover of its democracy. So they had a democratically elected mayor, city council, and so forth. But because of its decline into such financial strife, there were rules, the Emergency Financial Manager Law in particular, that allowed the state to then take over Flint. And so they pushed aside the mayor, they pushed aside the city council, and they put someone in whose decision-making was based purely on balancing the books. He wasn't from Flint, he didn't live in Flint, his family didn't live in Flint. And that didn't mean that, he was this heartless person who didn't care about poisoning children. It just meant that, that he had one job, and his job was to balance the books. And he didn't have any other mandate, like make sure that you uphold human rights or anything like that. It was just about the bottom line. And so for him, the bottom line was able to be achieved by switching from one source of water to a cheaper source of water that happened to be this, toxic cesspool that was the Flint River due to those other factors. And so this is why we have this now population of now 100,000 people who have children with irreversible brain damage. And so we see how all of these issues of democracy, of economic development, of the tie between corporate interest and how our policies are made are interconnected, and how it affects education, the future of our children. Race and class are all in there in terms of how that happened to this place, how that was allowed to happen to this place. And then how it went for several years with them drinking this contaminated water before it actually came to light. And it only came to light when two white folks really brought it to light, and that was Rachel Maddow and Michael Moore. Before that, people were still drinking that water the whole time, but their voices, their cries for mercy, their cries for help went completely unheard and unanswered. So, again, that kind of gives us a sense of the microcosm of why movements must unite, because that is, it's just the very essence of the problems that we have in our society currently. So going forward, just looking at some of the commons and the ways that communities are impacted by our need for the commons, but the way we generate these resources for the commons. So looking at the energy system alone, this picture is the Cesar Chavez High School in Houston, Texas. And that oil refinery that's right next to it is one of 5 oil refineries within a 10-mile radius of that school. And that's because Houston has a pro-business kind of way of operating. That means they have no zoning laws whatsoever. So that means that, oil refinery can be just right next to a school like that, and right next to a home, or right next to whatever, because there's 0 zoning laws. And again, it's that unholy marriage between, and the decision makers wanting money in at no cost. So just, at no, without consideration for other costs other than financial costs. And so, and what does that mean for the children who are running up and down, getting their respiratory rates up, and then sucking that stuff down and that's just what we see, not to mention the pollution that's coming from the other places that we don't see. We know that after the BP oil drilling disaster that happened, again, because of the unsafe ways that we're generating energy, we had loss of life of the workers who were on the part of that operation. And then we had the livelihoods of the folks who lived in the Gulf who are still impacted, whether the fisheries haven't come back, or some of the businesses that went down because of the tourism and so forth that still haven't been repaired, and they're still suffering from that. And that was on top of Hurricane Katrina and the other challenges that assail the Gulf region. And this was the only way that folks had to cry out. This is actually painted on the side of a BP gas station in the middle of the night when it was closed. But that was like the way the communities, it was just David and Goliath situations. This was the only voice that they had to be able to express their views. And then we have not only communities that are host to these operations that damage them, we also have the workers who are literally just seen as commodities in this system. So the coal miners have 76,000 coal miners have died of black lung disease since 1968, while year after year year, those very mining companies that employ them pay money to the National Mining Association, who then lobbies against regulations that would have protected their workspace from coal mine dust. So the companies that are supposed to hold them as people and people of value for them, because they're supposed to be a community, and they're not. They're not keeping their interest in mind, again, just about the bottom line of making sure that they can operate as cheaply as possible, and that means no regulations. And that's at the cost of the lives of the 76,000 coal miners, not to mention the impacts on their families and so forth. And so, again, just pointing out the tie between, our work, our livelihoods, our health and our well-being, the economy, corporations, and decision making that should be protecting us and having safeguards in place for us and our workers. Mountaintop removal is another way that we're generating energy by blasting the top off the mountains, gouging out the coal that's in it, and then using it to burn to create energy. And so we have not only the destruction of these beautiful vistas, but also when you're blasting off the top of the mountains, the dust that goes out into the air has affected the health and well-being of the communities that are hosting this. A lot of folks in the Appalachian region have that challenge, and otherwise. It also gets down into the stuff gets down into the rivers and streams, killing off whole species of fish. The blasting process itself is so violent that the foundations of people's homes have been damaged in that process. There's just so many ways that blasting, obviously, is never going to be a good thing. So again, and it's all about getting coal out of these mountains in order to generate energy. And then on the other side, in terms of the burning of the coal, these coal-fired power plants, there's been 500 across the United States. They're disproportionately located in communities of color and low-income communities. And the stuff that comes out of these smokestacks include mercury, arsenic, lead, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxide, and then they're the #1 generators of carbon dioxide emissions, which again are the #1 greenhouse gas that drives climate change. So we see how this then begins to connect to climate change as well, but it also harms the health and well-being of the communities that are host to these facilities. And then on the other end of this kind of cradle to grave, from mining to combustion, then we have the coal ash disposal. So there's very little regulations around coal ash disposal. So the communities that are host to the coal ash disposal, and the fact that coal ash disposal goes into, again, our rivers and streams or our ponds, and with it's fairly unfettered, and it has all kinds of toxins in the coal ash, because the production of the coal ash itself, the process of burning, that means that other new toxins are being introduced to it as well. And so selenium, lead, all these different things are in there, and they get into these waters that people actually fish out of. What's interesting is that I was in North Carolina and doing a visit after the coal ash spill that happened there a couple of years ago. And I went, and Duke Energy had built a fishing pier on a coal ash pond. So people were fishing out of this coal. I was stupefied. Like, I couldn't even find the words to, I didn't even understand how this could even be possible. And so people were fishing, and the fish come there more because when the coal plants release this water, the water from the process, the steam the process into the water, that it actually it's warm, so it attracts the fish. So the fish are attracted, so people go and they fish out of the waters, but the waters are just contaminated with mercury and all this other stuff as well. So it's a whole thing, and but yet, literally Duke Energy builds a fishing deck off of this. And so one of the times I was doing one of these presentations, and one of the NAACP presidents, vice presidents was there, and he talked about how he used to fish out of the Hudson River in New York, and until the time that he, especially when money would become low in the family, and he was just trying to feed the family and help his mom, and I think he was a single mom household, until the time that he pulled his fish out of the water and all the scales fell off the fish instantly. So these are the kind of things, and when we went to River Rouge in Detroit, the people were fishing out of the water, and we were like, do you see the mercury, there's a mercury advisor here, and it's like, I'm just trying to put food on the table. I don't know what that sign means, I don't know what, but it tastes good, and we don't have any other choice, So these are the kind of choices that people shouldn't even have to make between feeding their families contaminated fish or not feeding their families at all. So And then even the some of these coal ash spills are there's such a large volume of coal ash. It's actually this spill in Tennessee Valley coal ash spill actually destroyed a home, several different homes, because of the volume and the violence of the level of coal ash that was involved there. So these are the kind of ways, again, that we're producing energy and the cost that people are paying from those processes. And then again, the very communities that are most likely to be host to these energy production processes are the ones that often are in such poverty that they're more likely to have their energy cut off. And so that is the ultimate in irony. They're sacrificing their life, or injustice. They're sacrificing their health and well-being of their families, and yet they're so poor that they actually are more subject to getting their lights cut off. So we're actually putting out this report called Lights Out in the Coal, Reforming Utility Business Model as if Human Rights Matter, because we're seeing these instances of people who don't have their lights cut off, and they use candles to light their homes, and then those candles obviously are unsafe. And there's multiple instances where people's homes have burned down and lives have been lost as a result. People also get their oil or their heating shut off, and then they use space heaters because the electricity might still be on, and space heaters also are notoriously responsible for home fires. We just had in Baltimore a situation where a space heater was used. This family had 9 children. Now they have 3 children. So these are the choices that people are making and the cost that people are paying for us to keep the lights on while they don't even have access to those very resources. We talk about our waste systems. Similarly, the waste from the BP oil drilling disaster went disproportionately to communities of color and low-income communities, not because BP said, oh, I'm going to dump my waste on black people, but because these are where landfills are disproportionately sited in low-income communities and communities of color, and that's all tied to property values and where it's cheaper to have them sited. In Alabama, they have the lowest cost per ton for landfills because of the low values of properties. Alabama gets waste from 26 states. Wow. And so it's become like the dumping ground for the nation, and of course they're being dumped largely in African American communities in Alabama and poor African American communities in the state. And so the waste from the BP oil drilling disaster disproportionately went to communities that were a higher proportion of people of color. POC stands for people of color in the schematic. And so that's just, and the stuff that's included in the waste from the BP oil drilling disaster includes the dispersant that they use for, to clean up the oil. And what's not so known is the fact that dispersant that they used is banned in 93 countries throughout the country. And so, but yet because the U.S. doesn't include it on its toxic release inventory or whatever, then it's not classified as hazardous. So they're able to dump it in landfills that are just cited for household waste with no special hazardous material handling. And so this kind of, again, that kind of series of the connection between corporate interests that keep our toxic release inventory with a lot of the toxins that are actually damaging off of the list, and then the fact that the tie between the fact that these things are disproportionately cited in communities of color and low-income communities, all of that is married together. And again, this is why our movements must unite, because each of these things are tied to each other, inextricably so. And so when I was going to visit this particular landfill in Springfield, the Spring Hill landfill, in Campbellton, Florida, I was driving from New Orleans where I had been visiting other communities, and I was so sleepy as I was riding, and then all of a sudden I smelled this smell, and I knew I was close to where I was supposed to be, and that was this landfill, which was right in the middle of a community. There's literally a house that literally a stone's throw away, and it's surrounded by homes, and this is the kind of situation that the folks are in. And unfortunately, the thing about that is that landfill liners eventually erode. There's no infinite landfill liner. It's not like there's any time that they kind of scoop out all the landfill stuff and then put in a new liner or anything like that. It just eventually erodes. And depending on where these landfills are, then the impacts of that vary across places. And one of the communities that from the NAACP, they had written to us to ask us if they could have permission to endorse this first person who was coming in proposing a landfill. And the landfill operators contacted them and offered them $10,000 a year for the next 10 years for scholarship fund for the kids if they endorse this proposal. And so they came to us and they were like, can we do this? And we're like, no, you know. So, and I looked at the plans for it. I'm like, you know that they're planning to build this landfill on top of a water aquifer. And so this would not be a good, and so, but they didn't really get the connection. And they're like, but you know, you're denying scholarships for the children. This man wants to, you know, I guess they were dealing with one person. This man wants to help our children. I'm like, he also wants to poison them. You know, like, so these are the kind of challenges that we come across because people, you know, as a poor community, they're really trying to help the kids and so forth, so they see this as a way, and so they're vulnerable to these kind of manipulations by these companies who are really trying to use us to work against our own interests. And I can give multitudinous examples of people doing that, particularly targeting the NAACP because of its influence in communities. And so whether it's landfills or incinerators, which are also disproportionately located in these communities, and they put out things like cadmium, arsenic, benzene, which is a known carcinogen, and so forth. When we talk about our food systems, the way we're producing food, the fact that, you know, our overconsumption of meat in the first place, and then the fact that the way the meat is often produced in places is in these places that are, you know, inhumane to the animals, and they also tend to be located in communities called low-income communities, and then the pollution from them gets into waters. There was one situation with a hog farm in North Carolina where the stuff from the hog farm got into the stream and killed 110,000 fish. And so whether people are dealing with noxious fumes or contamination or whatever, and again, because they're grossly underregulated, and you know, big ag and these various agricultural hold a lot of sway. So when someone's proposing to have a regulation around this, it's not like there's a big kind of community groundswell of community support, and where everybody even understands that this is being proposed. But yet, big ag and these folks who own these things, they have all their paid lobbyists, and they're saying all the reasons why this is bad. And so these are the kind of connections that, again, we're making and seeing the impacts on communities. And so this is in North Carolina, the health impacts of hog farming in particular on communities there. Similarly, with the way they produce these big ag companies produce seeds. These seeds, they call them terminator seeds because they only have one life cycle. The type of transition we want to make, again, is from exploitation and domination to a regenerative, resilient society. But they're actually manufacturing things that work actively against the regenerative nature of society. So a terminator seed, you know, all seeds kind of, you know, you have the seed, it blooms, the thing blossoms, the seeds get somehow, I'm not an agriculturalist. Anyway, they get reproduced again, and then, you know, the cycle continues. Terminator seeds, that does not happen. They just have one cycle. And so what's happened in certain places is that these terminator seeds will take over they'll blow over in other farms, and then they will somehow, I guess they're an invasive thing, so they somehow kind of wipe out the way that, what'd you say? Yes, cross-pollinate. Yeah, so they somehow, and so as a result, folks' farms are being impacted. And there's some studies that show that in India, the high rate of suicides among farmers in India is as a result of this happening and actually taking away their ability to do their work there. And so, and also with our water systems, whether it's shutoffs or all the different ways that water is being polluted, well, you know, and so forth, we have this situation where water is becoming privatized and now becoming a commodity that people see as opposed to a right that we should all have, because you can't live without water, but yet some people literally are having their water cut off. In Baltimore a couple of years ago, 23,000 people had their water cut off for non-payment at one time. So, and then we talk about how goods are moved, whether it's transportation or people. There are certain communities that are more likely to live next to, you know, whether it's the highways or the shipping channels, and there are health impacts of living near these roadways and so forth. And again, this is an underregulated thing, that there's not enough air monitors, but the particulate matter gets into the lungs and causes damage, and it's disproportionately in communities of color and low-income communities. Similarly with shipping channels as well, and there are known documented health risks of living in this type of pollution. And so when we talk about the environmental justice impact of all those different systems, it includes water pollution, air pollution, soil contamination, that all gets into our system through breathing, through drinking, through the food that we eat, that we think it's a good thing when we're growing our food in our backyard, but if we haven't tested that soil and we happen to live in one of these communities, we could actually be poisoning ourselves unbeknownst to us just because of the air pollution that comes down in acid rain or otherwise and gets into the soil. So, and it causes multiple health impacts. African Americans, 78% of African Americans live within 30 miles of a coal-fired power plant. And the sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxide, as I said before, some of the things that come out, African American children are 3 to 5 times more likely to have an asthma attack or enter the hospital for an asthma attack, and 2 to 3 times more likely to die of an asthma attack. That's because of the exposures of things like coal-fired power plants, roadway air pollution, and all of that combines to make these kind of gas chambers for our community from these gases that we're getting from all these sources. And so this is an example of another landfill situation where this family in Dixon, Tennessee, their family had several homes along a kind of a homestead area, and the landfill liner eroded. Trichloroethylene, a known carcinogen, among other things, got into the water supply. They drank that contaminated water for years. Meanwhile, letters were sent, they found out, after they started to have these rare forms of cancer, birth defects in their kids. They went and investigated and found out that years ago, letters had been sent to the white families on the other side to say not to drink the water. And the animal shelter, they found out, also had been put on an alternate form of water for all those years. And they were drinking that water. And they only found out after these premature deaths started to happen. So these are the kind of things that are happening when we talk about the very definition of environmental racism and the very definition of, kind of disproportionate impact on communities. And so, and this is another just stark example of this Navajo family in the Four Corners region out west. That coal-fired power plant behind them is one of 4 coal-fired power plants within a 30-mile radius of where they live. They honored us by giving us this photo and telling us their story. They holding a picture of one person in their family who passed away from a respiratory illness. They talked about the respiratory illnesses of other folks in the family. They talk about what this means for their 3 young children who are in the family in terms of being exposed to all these toxins. They talk about the woman on your left there, who is pregnant, and we know that mercury is one of the things that comes out of these smokestacks, which is tied to birth defects. They also talk about the fact that there's no men in the picture, because even though the Navajo leader actually accepted and welcomed these coal plants onto the reservation because they promised jobs along with the coming of these, but they didn't bring in nearly as many jobs as they promised, and they also brought people into those jobs as opposed to employing the community. So the men in the picture are often other states working and only get to come home every few months. But they're often other states working just so that the family can live. Meanwhile, the ultimate injustice here in terms of being sacrifice zones, their health and well-being being sacrificed for the needs of others, is that the electricity that is produced by these 4 coal-fired power plants that are polluting their lungs, their waterways, and their land is going to Phoenix, to Las Vegas, which you can see from space, and Los Angeles. Meanwhile, the 2 coolers are on the porch because it's keeping their cold goods, because 70% of the people on the reservation do not have electricity. So again, the ultimate injustice and energy apartheid. And so the health impacts that we see of these things, and I promise we're going to start talking about something positive soon. The health impacts that we see of these things are we were doing one of these trainings from this report we did called Cold Blooded, Putting Profits Before People, and some folks were late for the training, and they were like, we're so sorry. Once again, we had to take our grandson to the doctor. He has asthma. They live 2 miles away from the coal plant. And they sent us this picture of the bag of medicine that he's dependent on to get from day to day. And then they also sent this picture of Antoine, and they talked about how this picture is emblematic of his life. He's looking on as this child with a pacifier. I hope you can see her. She's playing in the water. And they said that this is because his low lung capacity, he can't move around like other kids. They talk about how he's looking out the window as other kids are going to school sometimes because, poor air quality days, he can't go to school, and because they live so near a coal plant, poor air quality days are pretty often. And then they talk about what this might mean for his future, and this is something that we see, as I said before, with the high rates of asthma attacks and asthma challenges in our communities. from being exposed to all these different things. And so when we think about this, talking about intersections, we think about the fact that kids are having a hard time paying attention in school because whether they're getting the lead exposure from the smokestacks or from the paint or from the water or from all these sources of lead in our communities, or whether they are unable to go to school because of poor air quality days. And then also the fact that 71% of African Americans live in counties in violation of air pollution standards, and other communities of color are in similar situations. But 56% of us overall live in counties in violation of air pollution standards. So we really are dealing with a tough situation there. African American family is more likely to live next to a toxic facility. African American family making $50,000 is more likely to live next to a toxic facility than a white American family making $15,000. So that shows us that race, even over class, is often a factor of where these facilities are placed. And so when we put all this together, we see that we also know that on average, your property values are lower, on 15%, at least 15% lower if you're living next to a toxic facility. Then we know all the challenges to educational attainment for these kids. And unfortunately, studies show that if you're not on a grade level by the third grade, you're more likely to enter into the school to prison pipeline. So again, this is how we see all these extra issues interconnected and why our movements must unite. So I won't go into this, but this is just a little bit of a departure, I guess, thinking in a different way. So this group is called the Get Your Green. They're from a class that's called Get Your Green class. They're in a school called the High School for the Recording Arts, and they learn about all of their subjects through the muse of music in order to make it more interesting and more kind of rooted for kids. And so they came up after they had an environmental sciences class called the Get Your Green class. They came up with a song called Climate Control. I'm going to put the lyrics up in case you guys aren't as well versed in the hip hop genre, but hopefully this will go smoothly for us. We will see. Got to save.
We need to take control. We need to take control. We need to take control. Unclimate. We need to take control. We need to take control. We need to take control. Unclimate. We control. We need to take control. We need to take control. Unclimate.
It's getting hot. Yeah, it's heating up. Changing how it's affecting us. You mean the flood, storms, droughts, and fires, and heat-related deaths in the U.S. is getting higher, huh? Now whoever so what you doing? Neighborhoods affected by all this air pollution, and it's amusing, it's a problem, it's a solution. Decrease your carbon footprint, it's really not hard to do. I went on green since a little kid in my hood, the heat is killing kids. I speak for the climate, yeah, I'm the Earth's ventriloquist. Those heat waves, know you feeling it. Stop burning that coal, use propane when you grilling it, cause it can harm your respiratory. Ask these politicians for change, they ain't doing nothing for me. They pollute around my area cause we ain't in the category. We need to take control of this climate, ladder to prosperity. I'm ready to climb it. This country's morals lost, somebody help me find it. Our eco-death certificate, they ready to sign it, and I ain't having that, especially not around my habitat, and that's mainly where it happened at. They acting up on us, so that's the reason why we acting back, protesting, lobbying. Going green is my hobby, man. Stop drilling for fossils, worry about tomorrow. Keep going at this rate, the whole earth gon' be in sorrow. No resources to borrow. I said let's take control of our climate and your carbon footprint. Please try to decline it. It's getting hot, yeah, it's heating up. The climate changing, how it's affecting us. You mean the flood, storms, droughts, and fires, and heat-related deaths in the U.S. is getting higher, huh? Now whoever so what you doing? Neighborhoods affected by all this air pollution, and it's amusing, it's a problem, it's a solution. Decrease your carbon footprint, it's really not hard to do it.
Now whoever I am, I can leave out the house, but I can't go far, without my help, because it's really important distribution carbon footprint. It's really not hard to do it. Get your brain is the music. You ain't with it, it, then lose it. Climate change is the movement. Boy, we the relentless. Every day I suffer from respiratory.
Yeah, so that last lyric he was about to say, every day I suffer from respiratory, and he's actually the person who was singing, he actually is asthmatic himself. And so, yeah, they're really singing real talk from their experiences. And obviously it was not an English class, but, they were really, really talking. And so I appreciated, obviously their analysis, ask these politicians for change, they're not doing anything for me, they pollute around our area because they're not in their category. They even recognize at that age that they're not being represented by their politicians. And so that, again, was your green class. If you ever want to listen to the whole thing, if you just Google climate control, get your green, and it was part of this contest called the Dream Reborn contest that Green for All organization did. So you'll be able to hear. But I think we're going to make this available somehow online, and you'll be able to get the links and stuff. Awesome. So when we talk about climate impacts, so they made a good transition for us. They were able to make the link between the pollution they're experiencing in their backyard and the fact that climate change is happening and also disproportionately affecting certain communities. So already we have communities that are food insecure. One of the things about the situation with the Flint water crisis is that on top of the fact that there was this extreme pollution and contamination of lead in their water, the one thing that would have prevented the level of absorption of lead in their system would have been if they had had a safe and healthy diet. That's a known fact that if you have a safe and nutritious diet, then you're less likely to absorb the level of lead that comes into your system. And they do not have, in this population of 100,000 people, they don't have a full service grocery store in there. And so, and unfortunately, they're not alone. I just came from Milwaukee, and they actually have some higher levels of lead in their water than even Flint in certain parts of Milwaukee. And again, so much of Milwaukee is food insecure, and I could just name all the places I've been that have been in a similar circumstance, where they're more likely to get their food from a corner store, where foods are not only not good for you in terms of having antioxidants, vitamins, nutrition, and so forth. They're actually actively bad for you. The foods that you get from these places that I show that picture just to show the kind of things that people are eating. They're high in preservatives, high in sodium, high in sugars, all the things that make us so sick, and those health vulnerabilities make us more vulnerable to any of these pollutants that are coming into our communities, and certainly more vulnerable to the impacts of climate change on our communities as well. And shifts in agricultural yields is one of those impacts. I was just visiting right the day before I came here on Friday. I was in in Maryland visiting this place called Blueberry Gardens, and they had been running this blueberry farm for 25 years as a part of the community and so forth. And they said that this was going to be their last year operating because we were sitting there. It was 80 degrees outside in February in Baltimore or in Maryland, and they said that the blueberries are already blooming. They're not supposed to bloom until March, April, and they said that it's going to get cold again and the frost is going to kill them off right away. And so they said that this is the third year that this has happened, and they just can no longer afford to operate at all. And so the shifts in agricultural yields are real, they're happening now, and they're going to get worse unless we turn the tide of climate change. So whether it's a shift in agricultural yields that make, nutritious, those foods, those blueberries were feeding kids who would have normally not had access to these fruits in our communities. And so even when we try to do a local food movement, climate change is taking away that possibility for us in certain places. And so whether shift in agricultural yields, the disasters that we see wiping out places, that the photo in the upper right-hand corner, it used to be an entire housing development with home after home as far as I can see, but that tornado went through and just wiped out everything in its path. And again, that was a largely a lower income community, and who knows who's going to be able to come back from that after that level of disruption, because so often low income communities are also underinsured, so they might have a legacy home that's gone through their house through generations, so they no longer have to have insurance on it, and when they have to make choices between feeding the families and so forth, then they end up making a choice of not paying homeowners insurance, and then this results. And then when we talk about the intersection between disasters and the issue of these toxic facilities being right in communities because of the lack of regulations around zoning and so forth, this Grand Gulf Nuclear Station is right in the middle of a poor African American community in Mississippi. And when it was being built there, the community was pushing back. Everything from hearing that nuclear reactors are tied to infant mortality in certain cases, and also knowing that they only had one road in and out of the community and that there's low mobility. They were very afraid, like what would happen if there was like an incident and it was impacted. And sure enough, they had this flooding some years later, and the sirens were going off, and there was a worry that it was going to be breached, the nuclear reactor. And when we went there, the number of people have been displaced by this flooding, like thousands of people have been displaced. And we were surprised that when we drove into town, we first met with this church that said that they weren't able to get resources from the Red Cross in order to set up a shelter, because they had all these cots in these rooms, they had it all set up, and they just assumed that everything was going to go well. The Red Cross refused to give them resources. Then we found the Red Cross folks, and unlike the other places we had visited that had been impacted by these storms, there was no disaster recovery center. There was just the Red Cross officials, like in front of City Hall, just two of them were in their little Red Cross vests, and just like a card table and two chairs. And we're like, well, where's the disaster recovery center? What's happening? And it was the same answer in terms of why they couldn't help the church and why they couldn't set up a disaster recovery center. And it's that they can't set up operations within 7 miles of a nuclear reactor. And so this is the ultimate injustice, the fact that homes are allowed to be built there. And so nothing against Red Cross. That means the Red Cross people, they were designing sane policies. The insanity is the fact that the zoning and the pro-business would allow a nuclear reactor to be right next to all these homes. So it's just, I mean, the fact that we have nuclear reactors at all is the first thing. But then the fact that they're near coast is just crazy. And so we have the vulnerable folks are more likely to be impacted by disasters, whether you're elderly, whether you have low mobility and pre-existing health conditions and so forth. And so and then this was actually something that was little known, is the fact that the prisoners were abandoned. Like all of the folks who were working in the prisons just left when Hurricane Katrina came through. So there was no, this baby is just so adorable, she's looking, unblinking. So the prisoners were just left and, locked up, no ventilation, and the sewage-tainted waters are rising up and just abandoned for days after Hurricane Katrina came through. I mean, just absolutely inhumane, and of course, disproportionately affects certain sectors of our society. So then when we tie this also to international relations and to, cross borders, we know that U.S. is 4% of the population, but 25% of the emissions drive climate change. And it's these vulnerable communities and countries that are paying the price. When we were at the UN climate talks in Poland a couple of years ago, the super typhoon Haiyan was going through and ravaging the Philippines. And Yep Sanyo, who was testifying on the floor of the UN, was so frustrated by the lack of ambition, the lack of real commitment to the real changes that we need to make in order to stem the tide of climate change. And he knowing that his very home in Tacloban was being impacted by this disaster, literally was in tears on the floor of the United Nations as he testified, because he felt the powerlessness, he felt their obstinacy in not really making the commitments that we need to make this transition, and literally ended up in tears on the floor of the talks. And so we have, we think of global warming, but it means that our whole weather system gets locked up. In some cases it's more warmth, and sometimes it's more snow, and certainly more flooding and extreme weather in that sense. So we've got a scuba diver going through the subway system in New York, and we've got extreme snow happening in different places and otherwise. And then certain places are feeling the brunt more than others. So there might be certain sections of the U.S. or certain sections of other countries that are experiencing it. And then there's nations that are being just, decimated. Vanuatu had an extreme storm that it's just a small nation. So when something like that hits a nation like that with the lack of infrastructure and vulnerable infrastructure, the impacts are much greater, more total. Then we have sea level rise and how it's affecting us all in the U.S. already, and how it's affecting the nations in the global south. The Maldives island already has built a seawall around it in order to protect it from the sea level rise. And they actually had, that's not Photoshop, they had a cabinet meeting underwater in 2009 to demonstrate internally and to the world that that's where they're going to be in less than 20 years. And so, but they're not alone. Right here in the U.S., we already had a community, the Choctaw Biloxi group in Louisiana, indigenous group, was moved because sea level rise has already overtaken their land. And in Thibodaux, Louisiana, they're losing a football field size land mass every day because of the combination of sea level rise and the ground is sinking because of the offshore oil drilling that's making the land sink. It's called subsidence, I think. Again, not a geologist. But and then Kivalina Island in Alaska also, they're going to be displaced within 15 years because of sea level rise taking their land. So coastal erosion, flooding, all these different ways that we're being impacted by climate change. And to the extent that NOAA official said recently that today's flood is going to equal tomorrow's high tide. So the high tide is, something that happens normally and so forth, and that's how regularly these floods are happening. We're already hearing that 1,000-year floods are happening every other year in certain parts, and we're hearing about the extreme flooding that Houston has experienced, the extreme flooding that South Carolina experienced a couple of years ago, and so forth and so on. And so then this issue of who is able to respond, who's able to bounce back, and we're talking about vulnerabilities. But I was struck when I went to visit this particular place in Huntsville, Alabama, and just saw that at one point I was standing there and all the people who were needing food, who were, displaced by the disaster were white American, and all the people who were African American, and all the people who were giving out the food were white American. And that just really struck me in terms of who wasn't impacted in the first place, who was able to bounce back quicker, who was most impacted and really in a situation of homelessness at this point and needed assistance. And then it also struck me outside when we were at the town hall meeting that happened at the same time. This is the folks who were on stage, people from FEMA, from the Red Cross, from local government, all white American and mostly men as well. And then the people lined up at the microphone who needed the assistance, who needed information, who needed services, who needed help, were just to a person, 3 African American women. And so that just again struck me in terms of the disparity of who's most impacted, who's making decisions, who's managing the resources and so forth, and who's in need. And this is a story that also talks about the intersections of who's in power and who's making decisions, and then how those decisions get made and what values are actually upheld in this decision making. When I was in Louisiana after Hurricane Isaac, which was in 2012, 7 years after Katrina, they were talking about how Plaquemines Parish, which is a poor fisher folks parish in Louisiana, how it was so overtaken again by Hurricane Isaac, loss of life, loss of property, extreme damage. And they asked the senator who's over that area why it was that the levees weren't fortified 7 years after Katrina, with all the levee work that was happening, why those levees weren't fortified. And she said she asked the Army Corps of Engineers the same question. And they said that they looked at all the levees and they used a formula to decide which levees were going to be reinforced. And the levies applied points to, they applied points to each levy based on what the economic impact would be at the level. So again, that takes us back to the same type of decision making with the Flint situation, just with no regard to people, no regard to human rights, no regard to how it's going to affect people. So then we talk about intersections, and we've already talked about intersection. Then we'll talk about some even other intersections. And one, I didn't share this before when I did this in Springfield, but this I showed it mostly because this is such a downer. But this is a site of where a home was, a Madison family in Alabama. And when this tornado came through, the mom was there. She had her son there, a cousin, and a neighbor. And they went over to this church that was next to where they were living, because they had seen all these people. They knew the tornado was coming, and they had seen all these people going into the church with families and with their stuff, and they were getting shelter. And so they were African American family. The church was largely a white American church with white parishioners for the most part. So they went over and they were like, "Oh, we see that you're providing shelter. We know the tornado's coming. We're living in this kind of pretty rickety home, so we're afraid what's going to happen. Can we?" And they said, "Oh, we're not providing shelter here." And so they went back home, and only the son survived to tell the story. Suffice it to say. So again, it's just it's like we can get money out of politics, we can do all the regulating and all that we can do, but when it comes down to it, we also need to think about how we're living together as people as well. So whether it's that situation or, you know, the situation around criminalization that we're finding, whether it's the folks being shot on the bridge with Hurricane Katrina, as people were escaping, or the fact that people who were characterized after Hurricane Katrina, there were certain people, the images that you saw were certain people you would see that were, you know, running with goods in their hands, and when they were African Americans, they were being described as looters. And then other people, when they weren't African Americans and they had stuff, they would be described as survivors finding items to help them to go, you know. So and you know, you just saw example after example of that very stark difference in characterization. And we find that so often, and that those kind of perceptions and labels are at the very root of racial profiling, police brutality, and the disparities in how things play out in terms of sentencing and all else in the whole prison industrial complex. In terms of gender, we know that internationally, women are having to walk to get water. They're having to walk further now because of the drought that comes from climate change and the impacts there. So it means that girls, who are often responsible as well for collecting water, in some cases they might have been able to do that before school, but now that they're walking further, sometimes it takes the entire day just to get water and bring it back home. So it says what are the future of our girls as a result of just the whole change in their lifestyles. Women are also being used as weapons of war in these resource wars that are coming up because of climate change shifting the availability of certain resources. This person is talking about years of scarcity, that she's talking about how these resource wars and the rapes that come with them are happening every day. And so this is actually one of the UN climate talks when we were talking about gender justice. And this is the two women from Tacloban in the Philippines, and in the middle is Kathy Eglin, who's an NAACP board member. She's from Gulfport, Mississippi. And so they really shared common ground around being disaster survivors and folks who had families who were impacted and lost from disasters. And so that's where they're there together with their raised solidarity fist around common cause and common action. And we really see this tied to Black Lives Matter in many ways, because whether you're being racially profiled, more subject to police brutality, and you're being shot down in the street, or you're dying the death of a 1,000 cuts by being poisoned in your community, where your life is also seen as not mattering. Flint had a moniker of Flint Lives Matter, because they felt like after 2 years where they were completely disregarded, that their lives didn't matter to folks, and it only was again after some years that their lives, that it was being uplifted. And you know, the Dixon, Tennessee folks who were being poisoned but weren't even given the respect of being sent a letter. It wouldn't have done anything to the county or anyone else if they just sent them the letter. You know, it wouldn't have cost them anything. And yet their lives were seen as meaningless, and so they weren't even afforded the respect and dignity of being given a letter to protect their lives and save their families. So the fact that Destiny in her video had to talk about I'm human, she's human, like you shouldn't have to even see that. So the notion of people feeling so devalued that they have to assert their humanity tells us that we're not where we're supposed to be as a nation. So again, with the U.S. being 4% of the global population, 25% of the emissions that drive climate change, not to mention all the other imperialistic, crazy things that we do as a nation that drives immigration in some ways, but we have these punitive, restrictive immigration policies that make it sound like there's these people trying to come in and steal from us. And as this person said before, they're actually coming in, you know, to help to reap some of what their labor and the extraction of their resources have built in this nation, that was built by immigrants to a large extent, or people who were brought over as commodities in the hulls of ships. And then now the same people, the same communities from which we extracted labor and resources and so forth, when they're trying to come in and just to be able to feed their families or have a livelihood, they're being seen as invaders and enemies. And so again, we need to be thinking as we work across movements of how we work together more and understand those interconnections that are inextricably tied. And so we hold common cause with the immigration rights movement. This quote really struck me from this Kenyan-born Somali poet, and really in reference to the situation. You have to understand that no one puts their children in a boat unless the water is safer than the land. So that really struck me as a poignant. And this person is from Louisiana. She's part of the Louisiana Bayou Keepers. And she, her name is Tracy Coons. And she was talking when we were having a conversation about gender justice and connections. She was saying that it was at the time when the Somali pirates were in the news a lot. You know, the Tom Hanks movie was out and so forth. And she was saying she actually identifies with the Somali pirates. And that really brought the whole room to like, whoa. You know, like a Scooby-Doo. But then she really explained that, you know, her livelihood is at threat, that level of desperation from, you know, she lives off the water, lives off the land, and with climate change coming and affecting Louisiana to such an extreme extent, she can see how people who also live off the water and so forth and have such a connection with the water, and then because of the ways that we have impacted Mother Nature, the turning, you know, the lack of bounty that they used to be able to see. She explained all of this. I wish it was her words, but she was saying that she could see how it would drive someone to do something just to be able to provide for themselves and for their families. So she really held common ground with the Somali pirates. So that was a moving moment. And so even as we try to make the changes that we need to make, the transitions we need to make, we still have people who are trying to hold on to the same level of consumption, the same level of whatever, in order to maintain the status quo, the same level of wealth, the same level of domination. And so instead of kind of turning to more regenerative, cooperative, resilient ways of living, we're trying to do the same thing in a different way, but like maintain the same type of lifestyles and the same system. So as Martin Luther King says, all progress is precarious, and the solution of one problem brings us face to face with another problem. And so whether we're, you know, clear cutting, knocking down, you know, whole fields of land in order to grow ethanol to burn in our cars so we can continue to consume in the same way, so that we're growing food to burn in our gas tanks, or we're, you know, cutting down trees to burn for biomass. We're still trying to do the exact same thing, you know, in any ways that we can. Or whether we're pointing the finger to population control. And when you're talking about population control, it's usually controlling the population of black and brown bodies, people in the global south, in different nations, instead of really looking at the fact that, again, if we wanted to control the population, if we lopped off the U.S., which is 25% of the emissions that drive climate change, we'd all be a lot better off. Well, not us so much, because we do a lot. And then, you know, kind of pointing to fall solutions like clean coal. And of course, they put this nice African-American family in there, all smiley and happy while they're being polluted to death. Yeah, exactly. And then, you know, this notion of fracking, you know. And then the ways that fracking impacts us, or whether it's the earthquakes or the methane in terms of greenhouse gas emitting and the contamination of water and so forth, and including this was some of us have probably seen the video where they on Gasland where they light the tap on water. What struck me, they had this home that was where they tested the water and the community's drinking water and found that the federal level of explosivity, which was 1%, was actually 20% in one of the homes there. And so not only did it strike me that 20%, but it also struck me that there was an acceptable level of explosivity in the earthquake. Like, okay, we have 1% explosivity in our water. Like, wow, that's scary. But anyway, and so we have places like Oklahoma where, on average, before they had annually 30 earthquakes above 3.5 on the Richter scale. Now, on average, in the last few years, they've had 300 earthquakes above 3.5 on the Richter scale. And again, geologists are saying undeniably that it is all about fracking. Pardon? Yeah, thanks to Secretary Pruitt. Oh my goodness. So then we have people pushing for nuclear. Let's transition to nuclear because there's not as much emissions. Like, so again, that kind of myopic, like, oh, it doesn't emit. At least it might destroy the whole world, but at least it does no greenhouse gas emissions. And then we tie the fact that we're having this uptick in earthquakes with the fact that a lot of these nuclear reactors are built on earthquake fault lines, and we're really flirting with disaster. And again, false solutions. Someone was more eloquent than I could ever be in expressing this disdain for these practices. This is Sister Sweetwater in Washington State. And then, these market-based mechanisms that people are proposing as well. It's basically a shell game. It's really going to be the same level of pollution that they're looking to do, but to kind of, just move it around a little bit and try to fool us into thinking that it's something better. So again, why is this all happening unchecked, unfettered, and even now, unfortunately, getting worse with some of these appointments and so forth? We all know that some of the driving forces that are pushing us from where it can be. I mean, the Billboards are iconic, but they represent kind of so much of these various entities, whether it's them or ALEC or these different entities. And really funding a campaign to prove what's staring us right to the face. I mean, the fact that we could have all gone out in shorts yesterday, just like this gentleman, really says it all. And as Martin Luther King says, law and order exists for the purpose of establishing justice, and when they fail in this purpose, they become the dangerously structured dams that block the flow of social progress. And so as a result, we were actively seeing this. Instead of we the people, we have we the corporations that people have said so often. And so just another outrage to add to the acceptable level of explosivity is the fact that Halliburton has applied for a loophole for fracking to the Safe Drinking Water Act. Whenever I'm talking about this, I'm just like, it's amazing that you can apply for a loophole for the Safe Drinking Water Act. Like, it just seems like there shouldn't even be a form, so that again just kind of shows you how these systems are just really set up for, for profiteering and not for people in any way. I'm not going to even go through that because I'll get into this. So some of you may have already seen this, and hopefully we'll be able to more smoothly get back out of it after it's over. But folks have probably seen, maybe some of you have seen this video by 350, but it's kind of proposing a new system for acknowledging the impacts of climate change denial and really putting the blame where it needs to be. So hopefully this will go smoothly for us. Before I play it, is there anyone in this room named Sandy? Yes? Okay, thank you. Anybody named Ivan? How about Katrina? Or Matthew? So you will see why this is relevant.
Sandy. Ivan. Katrina. Since 1954, the World Meteorological Organization has been naming hurricanes and tropical storms. But what did these people do to deserve having their names attached to this? As climate change continues to create more frequent and devastating storms, we propose a new naming system. One that names extreme storms after policymakers who deny climate change.
Seaboard sometime early tonight. Windows are being boarded up and grocery stores are virtually empty as Marco Rubio threatens everything in his path.
Michelle Bachmann is on the way, folks, and specifically the eye of Michelle Bachmann will be hitting Florida in a few hours.
Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann is incredibly dangerous. If you value your life, please seek shelter from Michelle Bachmann.
Senator David Vitter is turning out to be one of the hugest and costliest disasters in American history.
David Vitter is literally lifting boats out of the water and tossing them onto the land.
In New Orleans, the levees that were built to stop Hurricane Colin Peterson have been obliterated. Here where Speaker John Boehner is really getting a number on this coastline. John Boehner is just destroying this town. Under pressure as thousands of animals have been displaced or killed by Governor Rick Perry.
We can't take care of the animals that we rescued, and so some of them are going to have to be put down, all because of Rick Perry.
We've been here for 2 days because of Congressman Paul Ryan. I have friends still out there. It's scary because I have no idea what Paul Ryan could be doing to them right now.
Senator James Inhofe has turned out to be a worst-case scenario come true. And now an entire nation is wondering how they'll ever recover from the disaster that is James Inhofe.
After policymakers who deny climate change sign the petition at climatenamechange.org before John Boehner blows your entire city away.
So, yeah. All right. Okay, good. So, as you see, so as we look to make the transition to where we want to be, this is where we get to the positive side. That's a big transition. It begins with holding our policymakers accountable for the decisions they're making, they aren't making on our behalf. And we use a frame around resistance, resilience, reclamation, and revolution because as hopefully I've illustrated, and I'm sure as you've experienced in different ways, we can't just tweak a system that's so deeply flawed, that's really based on this notion of there being winners and losers. I mean, as a capitalist economy is, we have to have a total system change and a total revolution in order to have, to uphold the human and civil rights of us all. Whether it's our political governance system, our economic, finance, manufacturing, trade, labor system, our food, agricultural systems, our waste systems, our energy systems, our transport, all of them are rooted in this notion of profits over people, over finances, over families, over, I could keep going, probably, maybe, I'm not a poet, but as a result, we have these rampant violations of human rights. And so when we look at a transition, we want to move away from an extractive economy, one that's built on exploitation and rulemaking to just uphold a wealthy few, to a new economy that stops the bad and that really builds a new living economy that's built on regeneration, resilience, cooperation, and really built on deep democracy as a foundation. And so, moving away from drilling and burning to harnessing the sun and wind, moving away from burning and burying our waste to recovery, reusing and recycling our waste, moving away from genetically modifying, trucking and shipping our food to advancing local production that's nutritious and accessible and creates new jobs, moving away from privatizing our essential resource of water to acknowledging water as a human right and ensuring access to this for all, moving away from displacing people from home and land to upholding housing as a human right, protecting land from appropriation and ensuring access to a place called home for everyone, moving away from commoditizing people and labor to upholding living wages and workers' rights, moving away from surveilling, profiling, criminalizing, incarcerating, and a militarization based on skin of color, country of origin, to prioritizing restorative justice, rehabilitation where necessary, and peace. Moving away from, so we also have the situation where individual conversations are so defaulting to tension and conflict, and we need ones that are characterized by deep listening, understanding, and grace. We must move away from tokenization, lip service, and superficial diversity to real shifts in leadership and ownership and power. And so as we do this is a quote from the Climate Justice Alliance, of which we're a part. It takes strong roots to weather the storm. Community leadership is imperative to address the root cause of climate crisis and foster resilience. So as we advance true democracy, we see the ties between voting rights. The same folks that pay into ALEC and so forth are the same ones who are advancing this fossil fuel-based energy economy. And ALEC is the same entity that's not only suppressing our rights to safeguards and regulations, but suppressing our right to vote and suppressing our rights to have a good and free public education and so forth and so on. So we have to really consider ourselves as working together across movements to address getting money out of politics and advancing voters' rights. And so, and that means not only in the voting booth, but also making sure that we're there when regulations are being reformed, whether it's a public service commission or the zoning boards or all these smaller venues, but still where decisions are being made and often where the people are absent in decision making. So we have to also at the same time start to build our systems locally, especially now where federal policy might not necessarily be going our way for a few years now. We have to really start focusing on localism and as well as state level policies as we build towards the the next administration. But in the meantime, we can't just kind of sit back and say, as you all have by being here, no, so I don't have to tell you that. We have to start to be the change that we want to see in the world. Be uniting in resistance, as the folks did in Curtis Bay. They didn't need a policy or so forth. They were just able to push back, with really united action to get popular opinion to not approve the permit that they were applying for to build this incinerator. And in South Africa, they're uniting under the same banner of stopping the 1% from profiting from pollution. So we're starting to recognize across borders. So even as we work to stop coal burning here, we also need to work with our folks in the global south so that we are pushing back against coal exports as well. So we don't just move it from one place to another, and then work with our folks in the global south who are then developing policies to say, we don't want coal, we want this, or that's just an example. Working across borders so that we don't have a global kind of version of NIMBY, not in my backyard, it should be not in my nation, and not in your nation, and not in her nation either. So as we talk about, talk about uniting at these UN climate talks, civil society walked out. So even though they said, all right, whether we're from the U.S. or these places, we need everyone to unite around having aggressive commitments to the transition that we need to make as a world. The Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance was talking about low ambition and really recognizing that for some of their nations that are potentially being obliterated by the impacts of climate change, that 2 degrees is not only suicide, but for them it's actually genocide for so many. Some of the successful campaigns, such as one that actually got the Bank of America to divest from coal. So we're having some successes there. We need to keep pushing forward to really push against the corporate influences. One group that I work with is called Interfaith Center on Corporate Responsibility. So when you have a nun in the shareholders meeting saying, that what you're doing is wrong, we can make a change in even the most heartless of corporations if we, use the right levers and really call on the moral conscience. Because very few people are pure evil. I can name a couple, but people can be moved if you really know where their values are and how to approach them from that standpoint. Gender justice, whether standing in solidarity across nations, the resistance needs to stay connected. This is actually the historically black colleges and universities and the NAACP youth were at the UN climate talks in Paris, and we actually held a Black Lives Matter action there. We marched through the halls of the UN and we staged a 4.5-minute die-in. Thank you. And so it's funny because they're holding these signs, and they had gotten there, the HBCU group had gotten there before I was. I was still trying to navigate the Paris subway system. And they called me while I was on the subway, and they said, they won't let us in with our signs. And I was on with Beverly Wright, and if anybody knows her, she's pretty emotional. Anyway, she was very upset. And I got there, and she was there yelling at the Pope. They didn't speak a word of English. She didn't speak a word of French. And I was like, and so I said, okay. So they had confiscated signs and moved them over someplace else. And so I went in on go and speak with the police. I know enough French to kind of get by. And so they were like, well, we don't understand the signs. And the terrorism, the situation with the Bataclan had just happened. And so there was a heightened level of security and surveillance and so forth. So we don't know what these signs say, we can't let them in. So even though I knew the signs probably said, it was Black Lives Matter action, so I knew that they weren't kind of all sweetness and light, but I was like, I'm sure they said, we need more ambition, so I'm just like, taking advantage of the fact that they can't read English. So eventually they were like, okay, they let them in. So all's well that ends well. Anyway, we're in front of the American Petroleum Institute with our interfaith action, again, wearing our collars and various dress and so forth, saying it's immoral to wreck our planet with your dirty fossil fuels. We occupied them in D.C., at their headquarters in D.C. The Franciscans at an anti-fracking rally, really all, again, coming together across movements. When you have Franciscan brothers saying it's wrong to frack, you're really moving in the right direction around. Movements united. And then also, again, starting to reclaim the grid, starting to grow our own power and so forth. This is a group that is actually nearby where in that same Four Corners region in Kayenta, Arizona. So we're all gathered there on the Navajo reservation under this conversation about how do we generate power without pollution? How do we have energy without injustice? And there's groups in that picture. The woman holding the mic is from Eastern Michigan Environmental Action Council. Woman in green is from the Kentuckians from the Commonwealth. The woman with the black cardigan is from from the Black Mesa Water Coalition. The woman with the purple flower is from the Southwest Workers Union in San Antonio, Texas. So it's really the real spirit of translocal organizing on Navajo Reservation, really saying that we need to all pull together and make this happen. So again, uniting across geographies, uniting across races, uniting across movements to make this happen. So whether it's doing low cost or free solar installations for low income families and training people to get on rooftops at the same time. This is another little video clip I want to show you that shows a family in Highland Park, Michigan. Yeah, so we're there already. Exactly. So this speaks for itself. Very inspiring story. I'm going to.
My city is the removal of the street lights, which basically put us in the dark.
Wasn't funding in the city, and DTE came in and cut the lights out, which was a tragic thing because, when you deal in the inner city, you deal with a lot of crime. You can't walk up streets at night. So that leaves people open to get robbed.
Took away our quality of life. I understood that money was owed, and our city being as strapped for funds as we are, that's what had to be done. But just like water, we need light too. We need to see, we need to feel secure. If, for whatever reasons, city government cannot make that happen, I believe that the people should be self-sufficient enough to do it for themselves.
It was sort of in response to this situation that Solidarity came to be. We realized that we needed to light the streets, that with solar power we would never pay an electrical bill again. With solar power we could do this in a way that was responsible and safe for the rest of the world. And with solar power we can have the community actually own and plan and develop the street lights.
We need lights, why complain when you can do it yourself? And instead of waiting for someone to do it or come in and do it, we can do it ourselves at a less cost.
Ideal place to introduce things that require community participation, community involvement, community support.
Well, there are a lot of creative and loving people that love their space, that loves Highland Park, and that are willing to do whatever it takes to keep it together, to save our city, to make it back beautiful again.
And Solidarity is trying to turn these lights back on, power them with solar energy, and bring the community together to plan and own their own off-grid street lighting system.
You get the idea. So. So they are back in the light. And after driving back from Hitchcock Center last night where there were no street lights, I could give you some tip notes. I was on the phone with my board committee chair. I'm like, I can't see. Anyway, that aside. So whether it's building our own energy system or building our own local food movement, this is actually in Kenya and this is in Kansas. And so again, they're tilling the soil on one side, and on the other side they're reaping the benefits of their collectively done community garden. Even as we improve as we make our developed green schools, people often think of it as just green school where it's kind of energy efficiency and so forth, but studies show that teacher attrition rates have reduced, absenteeism has reduced, and scores have actually gone up with green schools because indoor air quality improves, as well as it creates a sense of community, the green school model, because people are coming together to co-design what this should look like. And so as we think about diversifying, this is actually a schematic that shows some of the racial breakdown of a lot of our environmental groups, and whether it's in the government or in the NGOs, in the non-governmental organization space, or in foundations. People of color are grossly underrepresented, particularly in terms of people of leadership in these organizations. So that's one thing we're also working towards as well. Not only to have more people of color in terms of diversity, but to actually make these institutions actively anti-oppressive, anti-racist, so that they are more, so that by virtue of the organizational culture, people are working towards a common mission around around the equal rights and human rights society, race society. So transitioning in waste systems not only improves our environment, but also creates jobs, and they're cheaper to operate if we go to recycling instead of burning through incinerators and so forth. And so moving from to equity-based transportation, whether it's mass transit or going from Hummers to something more reasonable, In LA, they have a campaign, 1,000 more buses, 1,000 less police. Equitable for whether it's a tiny house or, multifamily housing that's again affordable so that we all again have a place to call home. And then, of course, clean water for all. This is a quote from Martin Luther King. One day we must ask the question, why are there 40 million poor people in America? And when you begin to ask that question, you are raising questions about the economic system, about a broader distribution of wealth. When you ask that question, you begin to question the capitalistic economy. You begin to ask the question, why is it that people have to pay water bills in a world that is 2/3 water? That's in his Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community from 1967. So, as I said before, it's not just also about policy, but also about really having networks of sharing in our communities and building social cohesion, making sure that it's inclusive processes and by communities to lead on their own solutions. And that we're really paying attention to some of these basic, restorative justice, reconciliation, healing, and so forth. And so this actually is important. We talked before about the looting versus the finding and so forth. It's important for us to tell our own stories. This is an African proverb: until the lions write their own history, the tale of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. I was watching Saturday Night Live one time and thinking about these things. As was mentioned, I'm on the board for Center for Story-Based Strategy that really, the whole process about how we tell our own story and how do we lead change through telling our own story. So I was watching Saturday Night Live one night and they were talking about this, it was in their news segment, I forgot what they call it. And they were saying that a deer, the hunter thought that a deer was dead after they had shot it, and it said that the deer rose up and gored the hunter after he was kind of looking at what he thought he had killed this deer. And so the headline in the local newspaper was "Deer Attacks Hunter." It said, or as told by the deer community, serial killer injured. So as we really move towards frontline community leadership, this is a resident and survivor of Hurricane Katrina. I'm not interested in any action plan to rebuild or organize a people's agenda in New Orleans without a gender analysis and a demand for community accountability. And so really saying that we need to be at the lead and we need to be thinking about these intersections actively as we think about next steps. We mentioned the publication around "And the People Shall Lead," and it's based on experiences around and guidance around how we really can make sure that community leadership is at the forefront and what that actually means. Because we can all talk about it conceptually, but we actually have to know what that means operationally and how we apply a principle to real action. And this is a list of kind of principles and practices of environmental movement building that have been developed by consensus actions in the United States and across the world as well. And this is one core set of principles, the Jimenez principles of democratic organizing, being inclusive, emphasizing bottom-up organizing, working together in solidarity and mutuality, building just relationships amongst ourselves, and committing to self-transformation. And so this is another quote from Martin Luther King: whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. This is the interrelated structure of reality. Another quote I like is from this woman named Lily Watson that says, if you've come to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you're come because you feel that your destiny is tied with mine, then let's move forward together. And so that's what we should be thinking about in terms of mutuality. And so what do we do? Again, getting together, starting to co-plan together. And, this is just a list of kind of things that we can do to help to begin to educate ourselves, begin to have dialogue together, begin to do what we need to do in our communities, small things, larger things. We had to add in establishing a sanctuary, whether it's a sanctuary city, a sanctuary church, a sanctuary campus, etc. As the world evolves, we have to be thinking about all the ways that we need to evolve with it, and particularly the rapid evolution that we're seeing now. And so just small things that we can do, and then of course there's larger things that we can do. CERT is Community Emergency Response Team, for those who don't know. And so just again some quick actions. Again, we're going to post these afterwards so you'll have a sense. So again, we can do this all as we come together, and it's so good to have you all here, to have your enthusiasm, to have your spirit, to have your energy. I really enjoyed it. We had a small conversation last night, and I know that with the passion and the energy and the interest and the commitment that you all have, that this is what we need. This is exactly what we need to move forward. I met yesterday, or on Friday, with a young man. I had been gone since February 10th, and I was home just for 24 hours on Friday. I'm leaving I love to come here, and then I'm going to LA and to Seattle and to Anchorage, Alaska, and to Flint and to New Orleans, and not going home till after that. So they were asking me what the day, week in my life or whatever looks like. So I was explaining all that, and they, by the time I was finished, their mouth was agape, and they're like, "Well, what do you do?" And this is when I was at Blueberry Farms and Blueberry Gardens. And they're like, "Well, what are you doing here? Like, you're doing all that. Like, why are you with us and you're only 24 hours at home?" And I said, "Because you are what it's all about. Like, you are the reason I do this work. Your commitment, your interest, your, every single action and every person who's really devoted to making this change and making this transition that we need to make is what, why I get up and breathe every day." So, and you, are part of that same family of folks. And so again, very glad to have you all. I love you all, and love, I think, is a critical part in this transition as well. Really holding that love and holding that harmony and holding that regard for each other. So, again, with that same words together we can, and that's my information. Maybe if you all want.
Yes, absolutely. So we have two more exciting things planned. Particularly right now, this event costs money. We have baskets will be passed on both sides of the hall, and there's also a basket out in the lobby if you don't get a chance. We are going to take a few questions, and we're inviting questions that relate directly to building unity across our struggle. So if you can stand up, speak loud, say your name. Anybody got a question?
Susan, can I make an announcement right quick?
Yes.
So we're here with your local nonprofit access station, Amherst Media, a volunteer from UMass, young student. I'm a board member, so I just want it to be known that when you ask the question, you might be on camera. So I'm just making that known to everyone, okay? And I'm glad we were able to do this to share it with folks who couldn't attend.
Okay, I'd like to also acknowledge Dee Shabazz, who's right there, who is filming this for Amherst Media.
Along with
Climate Action Now will put the film on our website. We're going to put Jackie's slides up. We're going to link to everything. And so you'll be able to watch this over and over again. Okay, questions? Say your name and succinct question.
Peter Blood, of course.
Okay, here's the mic.
Jackie, I think we're making progress and beginning to build unity among the Black and climate communities here in the area and the region. But I'm wondering, do you have any insights for how we can build alliances across parts of the country, about the 47% of the country that is supporting climate denial and didn't act for some of these kind of things?
Thank you, that's a good question. So a lot of times when we talk about, so this is why I start with vision, because there is like a mutuality around what we want, like, what our vision is for what we all want in terms of our lives. And I think that starting there, in some communities that wouldn't necessarily consider themselves to be political or whatever, it's just about like what we want, what are the assets that we have, and what are the barriers to that vision. So usually when we start there, particularly in places where we think there might be resistance, then we have more, more unity around that. And that's really doing a very local to local strategy and really kind of building on that local vision. And it's been interesting because in places where, for example, they're heavily oil and gas or whatever, depending on some of these industries, sometimes it feels fairly intractable, but there's always kind of places of unity or points of unity within that community we can grow on that can then lead to other places, other things. Like one place, it was interesting. One year they said, "Oh, we're not interested in this because we're Peabody Coal supports us, and and so forth. And then the next year, when they went to Peabody Code to get support from one of the community actions that they support every year, they found out that pieces of the community had gone down to, they had gone down to testify at the EPA hearings. So they said, this year we're not giving you anything because you're working against our interests down at EPA. And so then the community really turned around and said, we thought that these folks were our friends before. Like, we just didn't even understand that they were actually using us this whole time and we didn't know. They were preparing for this moment where that decision would need to be made, and when they didn't even know that there was going to be a moment, not to mention that they were going to lose for having made that decision. And so that actually opened their eyes to what the real basis of that relationship was. And so those kind of revelations are actually help people to turn around as well. So I think some of it is really starting with kind of the commonalities in terms of what people need, and some of it is just waiting for some of these entities to reveal themselves or for people to be able to turn around. So that's some, of course it's not going to cover all, but it's a couple. Sure, thank you. Other questions or comments?
Questions? Yeah, back there, in the back.
A lot of your talk focused on the failure of regulation, and in the next few years we're not going to be able to depend on federal regulation. And I'm wondering if you have thoughts about state and regional strategies, and whether or not we can kind of take the California model where they're doing somewhat better on a lot of these issues and stand up state regulations to fight against the turnaround in Washington.
Yeah, so both state and local. We actually are doing a whole thing around local clean air ordinances, local clean water ordinances to start to really create 1,000 points of light to lead us toward. And even as we do those clean air ordinances at the local level and people start to see the changes that makes, it means that as we look towards even the next election, people are more informed electorate as we go into and recognize these other issues. So really, that's been a failure of a lot of the electoral work in general is failing to recognize that all politics are local and really focusing locally from the beginning and then leading it up to some of the state and federal work. So that's one thing. It's really a big local strategy and really getting folks to, because it is easier to have conversations at a local level because people know that what they're doing actually directly affects them. So not that people are selfish, but people like to know that what they're doing actually has some impact. They like to see it, feel it, taste it, whatever that impact is. So the local piece has been big. Also working on state level policies as well, not only in terms of regulations, but we are working hard on not only in terms of regulating against fossil fuels, but creating, really using a market-based strategy in some ways in terms of creating a new economy with energy efficiency and clean energy. So we're pushing for energy efficiency resource standards. So we have a large Just Energy Policies campaign. We did a major 559-page compendium and then 50 state-level reports on energy policies, including energy efficiency resource standards, renewable portfolio standards, as well as making sure this is tied to economic justice. So that's another important thing too, is to make sure that we are building, as we build intersectional movements, we need to make sure that these policies are also linking up. So we are tying local hire provisions locally and then at the state level, and then also disadvantaged business enterprise provisions, so that as we're building this new economy, that folks can actually see themselves as part of the new economy, not just people who are writing bills every month. And we're also working on distributed generation policies as well, so that it's not, we talk, and especially since the NAACP constituency is largely a faith-based constituency, so I often talk about not putting the new wine of a new energy economy into the old wine skins of an antiquated utility business model that's run by utilities that have been running them rather heartlessly for a while in some ways, not across the board, but many of them. And so when we talk about moving into the new energy economy, if we do it through distributed generation, then each of us can own a piece of the infrastructure and have more control in that. And then take away control from folks who have used our very money that we write every month to the electricity bills to then lobby against, not only regulations, but also lobbying against clean energy and energy efficiency, and lobbying against voting rights. So it's all, again, interconnected. And as we pull more revenue and more power from those entities, then it all kind of works a lot better. So we make those connections as well. So we work on, state level policies that relate to the alternative, as well as regional policies like the RGGI and so forth. also. So, okay. So yeah, definitely. And that's specifically around energy, but also in other areas as well.
Vera, do you want me to Cage has an announcement from the NAACP?
Sure. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jackie. You know, we are local. We're here. We're in Amherst, and we have a chapter, the Amherst branch, Amherst chapter NAACP. And we have membership forms right here, and it takes membership to help keep or make a viable chapter. So I hope that you are able to purchase a membership. It's $30 for a regular adult, and think about sponsoring a youth. It's only $15. It'll really, this is what we really need. You know, I lived in South Point Apartments in Amherst, and I'm also on the Amherst School Committee, and it's emotional for me because there's so much potential there to really put this into action. And we're over 50% students of color, and a lot of our students are on free and reduced lunch. And we have this exciting opportunity that our food services are now in-house, and we're hiring a food services director to really do the clean, healthy, local my colleague, Dr. Trevor Baptiste, who's also on the regional school board, who helped. It was a unanimous vote. So we believe in it. And I'll have these forms out the door when you exit. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jonathan.
Before we give our final appreciation to Jackie, I want to invite people here to take action right away. We're going to be making available 4 different spaces in the church. And the first space, Caroline, could you get up and say a word about the really important sanctuary work we're doing in Amherst?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Immigration and refugee and the crisis that we're facing with the executive orders impacting members of our community and people across the country is directly related to climate, right? There's forced migration that's taking place. And here in Amherst, we have a group, Amherst Sanctuary, that is resisting the executive orders that have come down the pipeline by creating sanctuary homes, sanctuary churches, a team that will be resisting any incursions, and also we're having a big meeting on March 4th to start planning that activity. So we're going to be talking about that in this corner.
And that's next Saturday's that big meeting, and we hope everybody will show up. So if you're interested in helping out, yes, we really need help. This is an emergency situation, so meet with Caroline there. Oh, okay, and then we'll take one more. Okay, yes, your question. Yes.
I didn't come in time to catch your name, sister, but thank you so much for the work you're doing.
Jackie Patterson.
Thank you so much. And I found myself struggling with 2 different questions, and I wonder if you can help me relate the 2 of them. Like, I wonder why on a sunny, warm day, watching a slideshow indoors, we have the lights on all the time in this room. And the other question I have is, can you speak to us about what the impact of nuclear waste on Barnwell, South Carolina, on the Indian reservations where it's buried, and are those 2 things related in some way? Are we forgetting something?
Are we forgetting something? We're forgetting a lot of things, I'm sure. So I don't know about facilities operation, but it's definitely. I mean, one of the things we often talk about is the other ways that we are raised in this society to do where things are kind of the standard. So to unteach ourselves from these ingrained things that have happened over time is going to take time as well. And so to be conscious, I wrote on my Facebook page recently that staying woke is exhausting. I'd like to stay asleep a lot more than because to really be conscious of every impact of every little thing that you do is just so much. But it's worth it, and it's good to be able to remind ourselves and to keep on track, and as we change, we change more, and as we clear off one thing that becomes a new habit, then we become conscious of other things. So I think, it's going to require a little grace, but a lot of concentration in order to make those transitions. But I'm not a big, I don't know, I'm not a expert around nuclear issues, but one thing that when I was up in Kayenta, you weren't here, but anyway, there was one part of the presentation I was talking about being in Kayenta, Arizona, and we were meeting on Navajo lands, and when I was there, folks were camping there, and in the little city there in Kayenta itself, I was struck by the fact that they had these health clinics for uranium mine workers, and it literally said health clinics for uranium mine workers on the sign. And I said, is it the fact that it's just that acceptable that people are going to be sick from uranium mining, that they actually have clinics, like it's institutionalized clinics for uranium mine workers? Like, it just really struck me, just in terms of that level of, and again, we were talking, you weren't here when I was framing around sacrifice zones, that, the communities are sacrificed that are host to these things, that workers are sacrificed, because we talked about the 76,000 coal miners who have died of black lung disease to create the energy, the lights that we have on in different places, although great to see the solar panels out here, so that's wonderful. But in other, so all these different ways that our communities, our workers are being sacrificed to the wrong ways that we do these different things for the commons. So we have actually talked about, because I get questions sometimes, you guys, in groups that aren't as informed as you are, about why we're not advocates for nuclear, like, because it's not greenhouse gas, it's not emitting greenhouse gas, and so I'll talk about the spent fuel rods, in terms of the waste side of nuclear, the nuclear production process. But that's pretty much all I can say is spent fuel rods. I don't know what they look like, or anything like that.
They last for 250,000 years, and they're buried in black communities, and they're buried in the
Yes, no, I know that, but I guess my point is that I'm not, like, I can't, that I'm not an expert on these things, but I do know that they're disproportionately located in certain communities, and I know that they're harmful, and I know the observations that I've made around the uranium mine workers. I know that we have a uranium mining ban in Virginia, and the cradle to grave, the whole nuclear process is problematic, so I'm able to kind of push back with that level of articulation. But as you've seen from the presentation, 187 slides worth, I had to kind of know, like, it'd be a mile wide and an inch deep in some ways on multiple issues, just enough to kind of say what's bad and what's okay, but not, by any means an expert in pretty much any area. But definitely recognizing overall the transition that we need to make. So, yeah.
That's good.
Sure.
So before we close, I do want to encourage people to stick around and get to work. And these will just be short meetings, just to get organized and make some plans for action steps. So in addition to the sanctuary group that'll meet in this corner, coming together, which is one of the groups that pulled this group together, will be meeting in that back corner. Russ, raise your hand, and he'll be meeting with you there. And in the sanctuary, in the front of the sanctuary, just go through the lobby and you're there. The NAACP, Kathleen will be there, and you can sign up for the NAACP as well as out in the lobby, and you can find out how to get involved. And if you're interested in Climate Action Now, I'll be in the back of the sanctuary, and we can talk about lots of stuff that you can do. Really quick, Peter has a quick announcement.
Just if you want to grab me, we're doing a concert. The three groups that sponsored tonight, CAN, Climate Action, NAACP, and UP, Come Together, are all sponsoring a concert at First Church on April 1st. And the Justice for All concert, we hope to fill the church with groups that are working for change to sing together for the evening. I've got lots of cards. I hope you'll take some back to your groups to spread the word about it. Thanks.
Okay. So, in conclusion, let's all give Jackie one more big challenge. Thank you all for being here.